This is the audio presentation for the economy of Turkey in the Middle East. As usual, I will say next slide when I'm about to change slides, so you have an opportunity to catch up on your notes if you need to. Let's get it started. Next slide. Turkey becomes a country in 1923. This is after the Ottoman Empire collapsed. Its first ruler, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, set up a command economy, basically to make sure that he caught Turkey up in all these areas that they were very, very much behind everybody else, specifically in terms of infrastructure. Infrastructure is a big fancy word, but it's basically the things that kind of form the backbone for any country. So things like electricity, ports, railroads, roads, dams, things like that every country needs to have in order to function properly in the modern world. He knew that Turkey was behind on a lot of this, so he made it a focus of the government to get that taken care of. Next slide. This is a picture of Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, again, the first leader of modern-day Turkey, the one that came out of the Ottoman Empire. Next slide. Now, since the 1980s, or in the 1980s, a lot of reforms happened, a lot of changes happened, and it shifted Turkey from a command economy into a more market economy, and it's worked out. It's by far the largest economy in the Middle East, and true to the market economy classification, it's about 65% free, 35% command. So government control is there, but about 2/3 of the economy is handled by individuals. This middle statement is very important. The idea that the Turkish government says aggressively privatized state-owned industries in recent years. That's basically saying that all these areas that the government was controlling, they're trying very hard to kind of push out into where individuals are handling, public's handling that rather than the government. So areas like agriculture, electronic, textiles, petrochemicals, which is any kind of chemicals coming out of petroleum. So it's oil-based products. Important to note, oil is not one of Turkey's major natural resources. Private companies now decide on how much to produce and set prices based on supply and demand. That is a key element for any kind of market economy. And you see here that much of Turkey's land, businesses, factories, they're all privately owned. Not all, but most of them. Next slide. This is a picture of a market in Turkey, and just kind of an example about areas that are being handled by individuals rather than being handled by the government. Next slide. All right. Now the state says the state still has an active role. That's when it says the state, it means the government. All right, and it is a major part in industry, communication, banking, transportation. So it still has some areas that it's pretty involved in, and it has a lot of taxes that it puts on businesses. And this is an area where it causes some problems because some of these regulations and rules that they put in place are very difficult to comply with to make happen. And so because of that, what's happening is you have a lot of government corruption where people are instead of meeting the rules, they're basically paying people to say they met the rules. Or possibly, to have the rules enforced on competition, things like that. So there's a major issue in Turkey with some government corruption that they have to get sorted out. The government does set some prices. Not on every, most things are handled by the individual, but some government does take care of the pricing for electricity and certain food items, staple items, the core of your menu and things like that to make sure that, nobody's making too much money or raising the price too much on certain food items so that everybody can be fed. Next slide. Some of the challenges that Turkey faces, the biggest one is easily the fact that it is in two separate continents. Most of Turkey is on the continent of Asia. It does have a little part of it that is on the continent of Europe. Most of the business of Turkey, though, most of the business they do is with Western Europe. It's in that continent. And so it's been trying to join the European Union because of the benefits of joining that, getting access to be able to use the euro, common currency. So those are all things that would help Turkey out. But because of the fact they've not been able to get in, and they're really still considered a developing nation. It means they haven't quite got to the point where you would call them a first world country or anything like that. And when you look at their economy, even though it's very, very good in certain areas, you compare it to some of the economies that are in Western Europe, and it really doesn't stand up to them. And right now, the European Union is not really looking to take on somebody else, another country that has a potentially weak economy that they're going to have to prop up. Next slide. And you can see here in this kind of world map, or at least portion of the world map, the fact that there's Turkey right there with a circle around it. And you can see the Middle East area that we're studying and everything like that. And all of that is attached to Asia in terms of which continent it's on. But in terms of where it is in terms of what it's close to, it's way closer to all the countries in Europe. And so that's where all the trade happens with Turkey. But again, because of some of their economic issues, the European Union has really kind of not wanted to get too much involved. They've got enough problems with countries like Greece and things like that where their economies aren't doing too good. So that's it. If you have any questions, feel free to ask.